Ahoy, Spookies! Didn't see you there. Would you like to set sail on this ocean of flavor with me? We're not leaving this curiosity door locked tonight because tonight we're talking Stranger Things.
Is it just me? Or is it getting crazier out there?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another of these episodes I do on the Late Late Horror Show. My name is Aleece, and yes, we're talking Stranger Things. I've got my Ahoy cap from Scoops Ahoy that I definitely did not make at work today. I've got my D20 in case a D&D game happens to break out, because you never know. Stranger things have happened. I hate myself sometimes. So, Stranger Things. We are in 4 seasons. Season 5, no release date yet. Season 5 is going to be the final installment. And I was struggling with what to discuss tonight because there's so much show for Stranger Things, especially with every episode in season 4 almost being its own feature-length film. There's so much to talk about. And since it came out in 2016, it has been just a monster of a series, if you will, in the best way. But one thing I did want to focus on a little bit is an element that is woven throughout every season and gets a certain kind of special attention in season 4, that being Dungeons and Dragons. So, as many of you probably know, Dungeons & Dragons is a role-playing tabletop game. It originally came out in 1974, and it is used in Stranger Things as sort of a way to introduce the antagonists of the season. In season 1, we have the Demogorgon. Seasons 2 and 3 is the Mind Flayer. Season 4, we've got Vecna. And using D&D as a way to introduce the Upside Down and the nature of the Upside Down itself, as well as to give characterization to the creatures that come from this alternate dimension, was a very interesting take and one that I always appreciated. And then you have our amazing characters themselves. You've got Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Will, the primary set of children, and the series starts out with them playing a D&D campaign. That particular day was 10 hours long, which is not unheard of. And very famously now in season 4 is the Hellfire Club. In one of my favorite montages ever, juxtaposing the ending of their campaign with the high school's basketball game set to Detroit Rock City by Kiss. It's absolutely wonderful. But something that season 4 introduces into the world of Stranger Things was something that was going on a lot in the 1980s. And while D&D is not quite seen the same way now, some of that has still carried into the modern day. Not nearly as much as it was, but that being the Satanic Panic. And D&D was a huge scapegoat of that throughout the 80s. Now, I just kind of wanted to go a little bit into the background of that because it's very strange and interesting and kind of horrifying, very horrifying if you ask me. So, in 1969, string of violent crimes were committed by the Manson family, most famously the murder of Sharon Tate. Now, without going into a lot of depth, a lot of the imagery left behind led the American public to believe that the killings were ritualistic in nature. It's kind of set the scene for this idea that America wasn't wholesome anymore, that the innocent weren't safe and secure. And with the murder of Tate, who also was 8 months pregnant at the time, America started going down into this spiral of paranoia. And with the 1970s, there came a slew of new serial killers who were infamous for like either blending in to the shadows or blending in with the crowd. Also, tailing off of the 1960s was the activity of the still unknown killer known as the Zodiac. With the murderer remaining on the run and sending out coded messages to the media and with a signature symbol, it's kind of no wonder that a lot of people at the time were suspicious of writings and iconography that they didn't understand. Another key killer of the 70s was Ted Bundy, who used his charm and good looks to blend in and lure women to their ultimate demise. And his techniques were also useful to the general public into thinking he was harmless and even falsely accused. And that only made everything with him all the more horrifying. And he managed to escape police custody several times. And there were other murders throughout this era. You've got John Wayne Gacy, Son of Sam. In the UK, there was the Yorkshire Ripper. The 70s seemed to be rife with these serial killers. But it's kind of a misunderstanding that there were more serial killers of this time. Rather, there was a rise in a coverage because the press just loves a scary killer. And it was this time that the press was really starting to change and kind of come into its own. Part of this was the fact that the trial of Ted Bundy was televised. And that heightened him into a sort of celebrity status. And so looking back into these killers and cult leaders, like they've been both interviewed and televised, and as well as to go out of their way to notify media outlets about their deeds. And that's never been to the benefit of the police efforts of trying to capture them. It's always been to get them the recognition that they crave. And with the media coverage becoming more of a thing and some of these killers getting that coverage and that attention, news outlets quickly realized these stories got them good numbers, got them good ratings, and sometimes even went so far to reveal information to the public that was never meant to be released, that sometimes hindered the investigations themselves. Also, in 1969, the same year as the Manson murders, was the publication of the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. And although the Church of Satan had already been established by 1966, the existence of this biblical text tied to Satanism changed things. And along with that is the impact of the book and the film The Exorcist, 1971, 73, respectively. Now, William Peter Blatty's novel and the film based on it is purportedly based on true stories. And with some people in the public believing that demons are real, it and coupled with audience reactions to the movie, with people fainting and crying, it resulted in enormous success, but also pushed America further over the edge of paranoia. So this combination of fear mongering and stranger danger and all these other things were factors in the persecution of the now very popular Dungeons and Dragons game. In 1979, a 16-year-old student, James Dallas Egbert, was discovered to be missing from his dorm at Michigan State University. The private investigator hired by his parents believed that was due to his history of playing D&D. Unfortunately, Egbert was suffering from mental health issues and addiction, which resulted with him taking refuge in the utility tunnels underneath the school. And sadly, he took his own life in 1980. But many people still believe that the cause of his death was Dungeons and Dragons. And a lot of people use this hype to market themselves and their work. For example, there was a book called Mazes and Monsters based on what happened to Egbert, which was later turned into a film starring a young Tom Hanks. The detective hired to look for him, William Deere, also played on the D&D angle of the circumstances of his life and death and launched his own book on the subject in 1984. TSR, who was the original publisher of D&D, actually saw a rise of sales following the release of Egbert's story. But the real first campaign, no pun intended, against D&D started with Patricia Pulling. Irving Lee Pulling, her son, was a high school student who had trouble fitting in and had issues and sadly eventually took his own life. His mother, Patricia, was convinced that her son's death was due to him playing D&D. So in pursuit of blame, of closure, she tried to sue TSR and her son's principal, who had placed a curse on his player character that she believed to be real. And she put together a campaign called BAD, Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. And when her claims were dismissed by the court, but among other things, Pulling and BAD accused D&D of awful influence, saying it was a fantasy role-playing game which uses demonology, witchcraft, murder, satanic-type rituals, and demon summoning. BAD put together a media campaign against D&D through a lot of different channels, through conservative Christian outlets. They even appeared on a segment on 60 Minutes. And so there just was this launch of fear and hatred for Dungeons and Dragons. And the circumstances are very tragic and awful, but trying to assign blame to something that they just didn't understand, D&D was a pretty easy scapegoat. TSR, the publishers, actually went so far as to hire a psychologist, Joyce Brothers, who defended D&D and let people know that kind of the whole point of it was that good was meant to triumph over evil. And Joyce Brothers, she was an American psychologist, television personality, advice columnist, and throughout her decades of work, she did so much, in my opinion, so much good for helping to destigmatize the profession of psychology. And the name Joyce Brothers, I do kind of have to wonder if Stranger Things creators, the Duffer Brothers, might have used that as the name Joyce Byers as a nod to her. I don't know, but I just thought that was interesting. But a lot of the concerns over D&D was focused on the idea that it was able to influence young people, leaving them unable to discern fantasy from reality. And religious figures likened D&D to demon worship due to the inclusion of gods in the game. And like it was even said that if your character died in D&D, that player could be driven to taking their own life, which was likely born from the rumors surrounding Egbert and Irving Lee Pulling's passings. Now, D&D's growing popularity meant that a lot of kids were playing it, and separately, some of these kids happened to be involved in tragedy. And, cases of correlation not equaling causation. And this aspect of the satanic panic of surrounding D&D is focused on in season 4 with the Hellfire Club, and specifically everyone's dear love, Eddie Munson. Now, in season 4, we have Vecna using kind of telepathically murdering these high school students, starting with popular cheerleader Chrissy, whose boyfriend is equally popular, good, all-American boy, basketball player guy. And the way that Vecna kills is the most body horror that Stranger Things has gotten so far. And there has been criticism of season 4 that Stranger Things has become too scary. Now, throughout this series, obviously, there is so many nods to horror, especially Stephen King. And it has the same font as a lot of Stephen King novels, and with all of the kids, it's very much inspired, obviously, by It, Stand By Me / The Body. There's elements of Firestarter with 11, and you have a lot of the Spielbergian elements. It also feels the kids riding their bikes and going up against government factions. It's very E.T. And so, you get a lot of that, especially in seasons 1 and 2. But season 4 is so far the first season that really, really delves into horror. And it's the very kind of obvious, and not obvious in a bad way, but the obvious inspiration for much of season 4 is Nightmare on Elm Street, even having the legend himself, Robert Englund, play a character, which is funny because Freddy himself is referenced, and yeah, take from that what you will. But with the character of Vecna himself and the manner in which he kills, it is truly, truly horrifying, with the students being lifted into the air and the breaking of their bones and then their eyes being gouged out. It's not something Stranger Things had ever really done before, not to that level. And I can understand some of the criticism of it taking that turn, because while there has been elements of horror and there has been death and a lot of scary things throughout the first 3 seasons, seasons 1 through 3 to a point are a bit more family friendly or maybe a bit more accessible to younger audiences. I liken a lot to Poltergeist, which I know people say Steven Spielberg's Poltergeist. Yes, he produced it, but it was Tobe Hooper who directed it. Give credit where credit is due. But anyways, Poltergeist, while being known as such an iconic horror movie, there is a fun element to it, and there's a lot of warmth to it. There is the family there's a lot of heart, and it is not particularly gory. There are slight moments of body horror, like him coming apart, thinking he's coming apart in the mirror, but I would say that Poltergeist is not a bad movie to show a youngish audience. And Stranger Things seasons 1 through 3, I think kind of fit along those lines. And for season 4 to kind of switch that up and really go hard into the horror elements and the creepiness. And I mean, there's even some visuals that could be compared to Silence of the Lambs and just that atmosphere. As a horror person, obviously, I love it. But I can see why people might be kind of turned off by that, especially if they have younger kids who want to watch it and might be too scared. However, the show is growing with our characters, the young characters especially. Now the 11 and Mike and Will and Lucas and Dustin, they are entering high school, and Steve Harrington has graduated. Nancy has graduated. Robin is graduating high school soon. So the young characters are aging and growing up and discovering more about themselves. And it does make sense that the horror would mature as these characters do. So where was I going with this? So with that turn into more horror, it kind of does switch up the dynamic of the show itself. And I am personally all for it. But a lot of the horror in season 4 is derived from the demonization of Eddie Munson, who is blamed for the death of Chrissy and the murders that follow because he's the DM of the Hellfire Club. He's into metal. He's weird. He's kind of a rebel. He's totally a guy I would have had a major crush on in high school, or now, or always, along with Steve Harrington. But I just need to talk about Steve Harrington in a minute, but I will get to him. But so there is a witch hunt for Eddie, with the only people being on his side and really believing in him and his innocence being his uncle and Dustin. And then once the other characters figure out that Vecna is behind everything, they believe Eddie and believe in him as well. And the way that the story is structured, with the boyfriend of Chrissy and him getting the town of Hawkins all together to hunt down someone who has not been proven to be guilty and is persecuted because he's someone that is largely understood, that's an element of horror that Stranger Things had not done before. And with knowing how Eddie truly is, and that he ends up sacrificing himself for a town that hates him and believes the absolute worst of him. It is so devastating and very, very scary on a different level than the body horror and the Nightmare on Elm Street elements. I one of my favorite scenes with Eddie is shortly before Chrissy's death. She and Eddie meet up in a park, and it's absolutely adorable. And I really fell in love with Eddie as a character, and I really fell in love with Chrissy. And that's what made her death all the more tragic. But they have such adorable, amazing chemistry, and they play off each other so well. And that scene was filmed after Chrissy's death scene. And as they were filming it and after, the Duffer Brothers had said that they were so upset with themselves that they couldn't have realized how well that would go. And maybe had that scene been filmed first, they might have incorporated Chrissy into more of the story. Maybe some things would have changed, but fortunately, things happened the way they did. R.I.P. Chrissy, gone too soon, like so many people in Stranger Things. And I hope to see more of that actress. But one scene in particular that really, I think, sells that idea of the satanic panic and the how unnerving it is the beginnings of the witch hunt for Eddie Munson. And as Chrissy's boyfriend is riling up the rest of the basketball team, and they're preparing to go around the town to find Eddie and recruit their townsfolk to their cause, the song Psycho Killer by the Talking Heads starts playing. And I just want to mention really quickly how well utilized music is throughout the entire show. The Duffer Brothers use songs just to heighten the scenes and just really sell the emotion and the movement of certain sequences. And this one was one of my favorites because it works on a couple of different levels. For the obvious, they are thinking that Eddie is this psycho killer and they're on the hunt for him. But on the upside down of that is the messaging that these people who think that they are doing a good and righteous thing are becoming killers potentially themselves, and it is deemed as acceptable and good and understandable, and they themselves are becoming these psycho killers. And you see that progress more and more as the season goes on. And I just love that. I just love that moment. And that is, you couldn't have picked a better song to illustrate that and to work on those levels. It's great. And you can never go wrong with the Talking Heads. One thing I gotta pat myself on the back for this a little bit. Back in 2016, I think the show came out in July. I believe it was July 15th, 2016, when Stranger Things premiered. It took me until beginning mid-August to watch, and of course I binged it in a night, and it became my favorite thing ever. And I even posted this on Facebook at the time, but I was like, am I the only one who doesn't hate Steve Harrington? I mean, granted, he did bad things, but he genuinely he showed genuine remorse for his actions. He took active steps to rectify the things he did and apologize. And then he becomes part of the fight, like when he goes to the Byers' house to apologize to Jonathan for beating him up. And the Demogorgon comes out and he just gets to work with with his bat and just starts going at it. He has no idea what's going on. Is just like, okay, I'm in this. And the way that they subverted expectations with this character, with it being 80s and he's the popular guy, he's dating, the main girl of the series. You would think that he would be that kind of stereotypical 80s popular jerk. But it's really turned around, and he shows that at heart he is a good person and he genuinely wants to become better. And I really admired that. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to see what they do with him. And then season 2 happened, and Steve Harrington just became everybody's favorite surrogate mother, babysitter. Steve the Hair Harrington. He is by far one of my favorite characters of this show. And then in season 3, when you got him paired up with Robin, who is just a freaking delight. Yeah, I just want to say how much I love Steve Harrington. Like my Discord name might be Sleeve Harrington because my name, Aleece, often autocorrects to Sleeve. So yeah, that's me, Sleeve Harrington. I love my precious mother, surrogate mother of many a young child. Yes. And I know it's been talked about since the show came out, the horror elements of Stranger Things that go throughout the seasons. Obviously, as I discussed a bit before, the Stephen King many nods. And it's no secret that the Duffer Brothers were very inspired by Stephen King. And you see a lot of that in season 4 with the house, that the Creel house. It is very reminiscent of the house on Neibolt Street and it feels a lot like the house in Salem's Lot, just this thing of horror and evil, and it feels like a living entity. That is very fun. And the character of Vecna himself is very Pennywise-like in many ways. He's kind of a combination of Freddy Krueger and Pennywise, targeting a group of children and teenagers and using your fear and trauma to get to you and to kill you. And then with the Freddy connection, sort of getting to you in a pseudo dream state, which it's so creepy. Although, and I love Jamie Campbell Bower's his portrayal of Vecna, and then just his character is so good. But the makeup for Vecna is, I don't want anybody to think that it is not impressive. And, he had to sit, I think, 8 hours, and I admired the team for choosing to go mostly practical with just CGI enhancements. And that is amazing. But I did see something going around with a picture of Vecna next to Jim Carrey's The Grinch, and how some of their design, the tummy especially, is kind of similar. And now I can never unsee it, and I'm sorry to have implanted that in all of your brains, but it's there for me. I had to share it with you. I put it into your dreams, and now it's there forever. Ha. um, yeah, and I just do want to say something in regards to the D&D aspect of Stranger Things. So, the impact that Stranger Things has had on D&D itself really can't be understated. It I think for a lot of people it did popularize D&D and make it more mainstream than maybe it had been in the past. And I know that a lot of people upon watching the show and seeing these characters' love for it and also just seeing how fun it could be, got into D&D themselves and didn't think it was such like a weird thing anymore. But I really do hope that season 5 throws out may throw out a little nod to Critical Role, which is such a huge thing in the D&D world and in voice acting, and now with the Legend of Vox Machina being an Amazon series. Just credit where credit is due. I hope that, I don't know, maybe at some point they just like throw out a little line just as a little wink and nod, like, hey, Critical Role, you guys are awesome too, and you're just as important and just as crucial in showing how amazing D&D is. Like, someone will say like, how do you want to do this, or something like that. It's just, sorry, my nerd stuff showing a little bit. But I think with Stranger Things, I could go on and on about this show and the specific characters and so many aspects of it that I love and that are so like just so important to the horror genre and to television itself. And you all saw it took me 2 episodes to talk about Haunting of Hill House, which is a 10-episode limited series, and I barely talked about so many of the things that I wanted to talk about. If I was to talk about everything in Stranger Things, I mean, that would just be an entire video series, or this would be like an 8-hour-long video. I'm not going to do that to you. Maybe in the future, I might focus on a specific season or specific characters. And, I didn't even talk about the adult characters like David Harbour, Winona Ryder, so much. But I just did want to kind of focus on something that has been talked about the show and been included in it, but I don't feel has gotten as much attention, and, kind of just go into the background of a lot of the things that were so important to season 4. And I am so excited to see where season 5 is going to go. I have no predictions for what's going to happen next. I'm very, very curious, and I think, maybe 2024 is when we'll finally get our final season. I know the Duffer Brothers they are working on a Stephen King adaptation. They are going to be doing, I don't know if it's going to be a film or a series, but I think film, but it's going to be The Talisman, which you see Lucas reading to Max at the end of season 4, which I just love. So that'll be really exciting, and I'm very, very excited to see how they do a straight up adaptation of Stephen King rather than a long form homage. And, I'm wondering how it's going to stack up to Mike Flanagan's adaptations, because he is now the king of Stephen King adaptations. I didn't mean to do that. But I would love to see Mike Flanagan and the Duffer Brothers collaborate on a project. That's just me. But I think...
Do you think Max gets her sight back?
Do I think Max gets her sight back? Oof. Yeah. I don't know. Of course, I hope so. I really hope that Max is brought back. I think that bringing her back now that at the end of season 4, 11 is back to her full powers. Oh, should I have said spoilers for Stranger Things? Oops. Spoilers abound. But yes, I do think that Max is going to be brought back at least to some capacity. I don't know, like maybe she'll kind of become like the oh my gosh, blanking out on my comic knowledge. Commissioner Gordon's daughter, Batgirl, she gets shot by the Joker in The Killing Joke. But she becomes permanently disabled, but
she's the Daredevil now.
Oh, maybe. But yes, she is just so great as a character, and she made me cry so much in season 4. Her scene at Billy's grave is absolutely phenomenal, and she is a phenom of an actress. So I hope that she isn't sidelined in season 5, because that would be such a waste of such an incredible actress and such a wonderful character. So I think we have a lot more to see from our dear Max, and fingers crossed. Yes. So tonight, that is going to conclude this discussion of Stranger Things, and I also have a rehearsal to get to. I need to spend the next 2 hours dancing. So this is gonna be an evening. So, even though this will come out afterwards, wish me luck in the past for the remainder of my evening. But
Good luck.
thank you. Thank you, disembodied voice, who is definitely not Dino. Have an excellent evening, guys. Yep, bringing it back. Have an excellent evening. Thank you so much for joining me and for watching again. And as always, ahoy, and how do I tip this? Stay spooky.